Now, the challenge for me in putting the Smile book together was how to contextualize this.
Hmm.
So in 1966, if you look at how music was changing and how quickly music was changing, I got upset all over again
Yeah,
because if you think in 3 years, the Beatles went from "I Want to Hold Your Hand" to "Strawberry Fields Forever."
exactly.
Why couldn't Brian go from "Surfing USA" to "Surfs Up" in that same
Yeah,
3 year period?
fantastic comparison. Yeah,
And the answer has to do with fear. The fear is understandable, but but it it didn't give Brian the support that he needed to know he was on the right track.
yeah.
The record label, again, didn't like what he was doing. His father didn't like what he was
No, he
doing.
didn't. No.
Brian didn't know how to deal with it, as he told me. He started taking a lot of drugs. Michael Vossi says, who was Brian's documentarian at that point,
Yeah,
he says, as far as I'm concerned, drugs is the biggest red herring in the Smile story.
yeah.
If you ask Danny Hutton about it, he says, Brian, as far as I'm concerned, Brian was just taking a lot of speed because he wanted
Mm.
to work longer hours.
He had to
If you
keep
ask
going.
if you ask Al about it, he'll tell you about, being in a car with Brian, and Brian, you know, maybe was taking LSD and he's driving in circles in a parking lot 20 times and scaring the heck out of Al. So everybody's got a different story and a different point of view. And in the books, in the new book, I talk about, if you look at the Smile story through a kaleidoscope
Yeah,
and then you turn the kaleidoscope, it looks different.
different. Mm.
And that's the challenge in trying to really know what happened in 66, 67.
Mm.
And I've done my best to include as many voices and as much information as possible. There's people who were not in My Beautiful Dreamer film, like Annie Wilson, Carl's first wife,
Okay, great. Yeah.
speaking for Carl. There's extensive commentary from Dury Parks, Van Dyke Park's first wife. There's even more extensive commentary from Van Dyke. There's more from Brian. There's Derek Taylor. I mean, there's
Amazing.
there's there's
Oh,
the
can't wait.
studio musicians. So there's everybody talking about it, and me, and kind of in a smile-like way, trying to piece it all, that narrative together so it
Together
makes
again.
sense.
And Van Dyke was incredibly, incredibly special, wasn't he? When they did the sandbox recordings. And I think it's from your book, but that photograph there from I think late 66, if you can see it,
I can see it. Yeah,
and Brian and Van Dyke and
Chuck Britz.
Chuck Britz, they were so happy. Look at them. Joy, you can see the joy in them. And they were on a roll.
Yes, they were.
They're
They,
absolute, you can feel it. And and then when Van Dyke left, that was a massive problem for Brian, wasn't it? Because he couldn't finish the lyrics. And musically too, I think, he was a little stranded, I felt, from what I've read. And
it's one can construct a timeline. If you go to Bellagio 10452 website, you can
okay,
see every bit of information there is about Smile.
okay,
None of that can tell you what's going on in Brian's head, what's going on in everybody else's head.
sure.
So trying to understand sequence of events. Everybody, talks about the fire sessions being a turning point,
Hmm.
and showing how disturbed Brian was that he created this music. Well, not long after that, he was on the Leonard Bernstein
Yeah,
uh,
documentary.
special
Hmm.
performing Surfs Up.
He wasn't disturbed. I think Fire was an incredible piece of music. They say, oh, they were wearing, everyone was wearing the toy fire hats and wood was burning. Why not? What was wrong with that? Get them in the mood. And all the films, clips you see, I think it's amazing. And of course, when Brian Wilson presents Smile and it comes out and they present it as a live piece, phenomenal.
Well, no one ever argued that the music of Smile wasn't great.
Yeah,
The question was this music right for Beach Boys fans?
Right. Yeah.
And one can understand the rationale behind the business
Mm,
decision of that. But
mm.
look, Capitol Records, whether they were behind it or not, they printed up 500,000 covers.
Yeah, 500,000. Yeah.
They commissioned a special booklet of illustrations and photos
Yeah. Frank
that would
Holmes.
go inside for the first time. A Beach Boys album would have something
Beautiful.
like that.
Beautiful.
So,
Yeah.
so there was kind of a reluctant, okay, we'll go along with this. But Brian could feel, I mean, Brian's, he really understands whether you love him and his work unconditionally or not. He
Mm.
needed unconditional support and love.
Yeah.
He couldn't have done what he did in the 90s and the 2000s
No,
without that.
no, for sure.
And
Mm.
and so we have a guy who's, he's given in the film Beautiful Dreamer, he lists 5 reasons alone why Smile didn't come out. In the book, I add another half dozen or so
Mm.
and say it could have been all of them or none of them or a bit of every one of them, but
Yeah.
he was clearly overwhelmed. And
Overwhelmed.
as he says, he needed to put Smile on the shelf for a couple of reasons that we didn't know. One of which is he says I figured I needed a year to finish it. Nobody would give me a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
And another is I I needed to do it because I felt if I put Smile out, it would destroy the Beach Boys.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So he saved the band by not putting it out. And that there's some logic in that for sure. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if he's right or wrong, or if he was right or wrong, but the net result was it not coming out, the kind of bastardized version of the Heroes and Villains single, the album named Smiley Smile for whatever stupid reason that was, that really would confuse people. Them not going to the Monterey Pop Festival, them
Yeah, that's
suing
a big,
Capitol
big deal.
Records,
Big deal.
all of these things,
Mm.
the Beach Boys instantly became irrelevant to contemporary music. It's
Yeah.
just
So quickly.
staggering
So quickly.
how quickly it happened.
Yeah. And yet, like Smiley Smile, and then Brian went on to do Wild Honey and Friends, all gems, actually, in my view, all little gems with beauty and feels everywhere and great singing and great playing, all little gems, weren't great big long albums. And, and unfortunately, as you say, once Sergeant Pepper came, that was sort of like, yeah, where are the Beach Boys? They disappeared in sort of a matter of no time at all.
Well, you had, and this is the thing, in 66 into 67, there were so many groups appearing on the scene.
Mm,
I mean, just a couple, like the Mamas and the Papas and the Turtles, who were
yeah,
making great pop, the
absolutely.
association, great pop hits with great vocals. Well, that was kind of the Beach Boys niche.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so Brian understood the Beach Boys needed to advance. Then
Mm,
there's all these new groups, Buffalo Springfield,
mm,
Cream,
yeah,
just endless list.
yeah,
Jimi Hendrix appears.
sure.
So Brian understood that things were dramatically changing,
Mm,
and Smile was, from his point of view, this is going to keep us ahead of the field.
yeah, absolutely. Big time. It really would. What would have happened after that is another matter, but and I still can't get my head around that really. But
Nobody
um,
can.
and all those album sleeves and booklets, were they all junked? All of that was junked, was it? Or put in a skip and gone? Or do
It,
some
it,
exist?
Most of it was trashed, but a few collectors salvaged it. So if you bought the Beach Boys Smile Session box set,
Yes, I've got that.
you have that booklet that was going to be in the original Smile album.
Yeah,
If you have the big box.
I have it. Unfortunately, not the problem I've got. But that was obviously a reprint, obviously. But
Yes.
I've got all the box sets in the world, the Pet Sounds, the Good Vibrations, the Smile Section, everything. But they're still in the UK at the moment because we've still got a house there, and we didn't bring everything with us. So I've got to, and I'm thinking, shall I, I need to get the smile, but where's my smile? Oh, it's in flipping England. Oh no. And books, all your books are there, and Dominic's book is there, Dominic Priory's book and other Beach Boys books. We just cut down and left them all, in the garage in boxes.
Understood. Understood.
And I think, where are all my CDs? Oh, can't find that one either, but never mind. We're sort of going off the subject, but yeah, no, I mean that box set was great as well. But so the 60s really, um, there was so much going on, and Derek Taylor was he was very much involved in the band and the Beatles at that time as well, wasn't he? And
Well,
he
there's a couple of things that are interesting about Derek's involvement. Brian, when Derek moved to Los Angeles, um, Brian engaged him as the Beach Boys publicist right around the time of Pet Sound's release, which is one of the reasons the UK,
yeah,
um, embraced it.
mm,
Uh, Another was it got great reviews. Derek couldn't buy those reviews. Those reviews were legitimate.
absolutely,
And as people like, if you were listening to satellite radio in those days, you wanted to hear something new all the time,
yeah, mm,
all the time. So here was something from a group that, the Beach Boys weren't quite as stigmatized in the UK as they were in America with their brand.
for sure.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. So Derek came up with the phrase Brian Wilson is a genius, dot, 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 I think,
Mm,
which is where it starts publicly. But if you
mm.
listen to the dreadful Help Me Murray tape
Oh,
from the Help Me Rhonda sessions, you hear Murray Wilson saying to Brian, I'm a genius too.
I know.
So the word genius was already clearly in Brian's world. Derek made it public.
Yeah.
And Brian hated that.
Mm.
Well, hate may be too strong, but he says, I'm not a genius, I'm
Binging.
ingenious,
Yes, yes, I remember. Yeah,
which is a pretty smart thing to say.
absolutely.
It kind of relieves the pressure. But unfortunately for him, Sir George Martin and Sir Paul McCartney and Sir Elton John and Sir Barry Gibb and everyone you can imagine, including Bob Dylan and everybody else, is saying you're a genius.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm a genius.
Hard to live with it, really, in a way. And as you say, a regular guy, really, in saying I'm ingenious. I like that regularity about him, that normality, rather than thinking, where do I put that genius thing? On my head, on my shoulders, or where do I put it? Yeah.
Well, like you said, it's something to live up to.
Mm.
and
Oh,
and and
absolutely.
and it became as much of a burden as
Yeah.
anything imaginable. However, it became a burden later on. In 1966, there's this wonderful interview that Brian does with one of the UK papers. And at the time, there were four major papers in the UK covering pop music on a weekly basis. And in the interview, Brian says, our next album is going to be as different from Pet Sounds as Pet Sounds was from Summer Days and Summer Nights.
Yeah.
This is a guy who is setting the bar
Yeah. Yeah.
without any doubt in his mind that he can achieve what he
Absolutely.
what he wants to achieve.
Incredible. Incredible. And you had all those other guys out there. And actually, for me, and Brian has always managed to make this music that touches you so deeply. And I love the Beatles and I love so many other bands. But for me, I'm afraid they are number one and always will be in my life. And you know,
Well, it's because the songs that touch us so deeply are often very sad.
yeah.
It's harder to live with.
Yes, yeah.
How many times do you want to hear "Till I Die" before you're going to have a nervous breakdown of your own? Um, so there's
Okay.
so I kind of came to this
Yeah.
theory, if you will,
Okay.
that the abuse Brian suffered as a child,
Mm,
the way he came to, if you will, survive that for himself
mm,
was to make music that had good vibrations, that
yeah.
made music that felt him better.
Yeah.
So we're all the beneficiary of
Oh,
this beautiful music he puts out into the world. The warmth
absolutely.
of the sun, Don't Worry, Baby, etc. I mean, there's just an endless list of these songs.
Brilliant.
But ultimately, he has to write Love and Mercy is what you need tonight, when really he's writing Love and Mercy is what I need tonight,
Yeah.
because there was no love and mercy in his life.
Where did the emotional security first start appearing for him, do you think, in those days? Or was it later? Did he find any emotional security in those times with David Anderley or Danny Hutton? Were these people giving him
I
that sort of security, do you think?
they were cheering him on.
Yeah.
He didn't need emotional security in those times. He was supremely confident. I mean,
Okay.
how confident do you have to be to think I'm going to make the greatest single of all time? I'm going to make the greatest album of all time, meaning it sounds in good vibrations,
For sure.
and do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then say, you know what, our next album's going to be
Even better.
a teenage symphony to God.
And I think when Dennis said something like, yeah, Pet Sounds, what did he say? Something like Pet
He
Sounds
said, "Smile is so good it makes Pet Sounds stink."
stink. Yeah. Yeah.
Now that's Dennis.
Good old
Brian,
Dennis, bless him.
when Brian came back from his first uh, uh, performances of Brian Wilson Presents Smile, I'd come back a couple weeks earlier to get working on the documentary Beautiful Dreamer.
Mm,
And when he arrived home, he called me, says, "David, you got to come over tomorrow. We have to do an interview."
incredible. Yeah. Wow.
And I'm certain that it was the first time since 1967 he had wanted to do an interview,
Amazing.
because in every interview between 1967 and early and late 2003, he was being asked about Pet Sounds, which he did not want to talk about. But now he wants to talk about it because he has presented it to the world, and the world has cheered and has given him all this unconditional love night after night.
Yeah.
And he says to me, "David, you're not going to believe this. For the first time in my career, I can't wait to get back on the road again. I want to go back out." And
That's
I said, "Why?" He says, he looks at me like I'm an idiot. He says, "Because Smile, it gets better and better every night we do it."
yeah.
And I said, "So, okay, Brian, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rank Pet Sounds and Smile?" And he goes, "Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give Pet Sounds a 4 and Smile a 10." Now, I, later on he would say 7 for Pet Sounds and
Seven and
Smile for
10.
10. But
Okay.
that I said, so then I asked a stupid question. I said, well, Brian, why do you say that? He looked at me, he goes, "It's better songs, it's better arrangements, it's better musical achievement, it's better." Well, like, what are you, a moron? No, he didn't say it.
Yeah.
He didn't say that, but that
Lovely.
was the implication. What are
Lovely.
you asking me? Why are you asking me such a stupid question? Of course it's
Brilliant.
better.
Absolutely superb. Yeah. So no, he didn't need any of that emotional security, right? But he needed but they were waving him on and encouraging him on. And then yeah, and it's so and did you think going back to Van Dyke, because what a character, what a guy. I mean, I was there actually as well when Brian asked him up onto the stage and in tears that, and I couldn't believe it. It was like just, but was he? I mean, he was offered a solo contract, wasn't he, by Capital, I think. Was it Capital offered him a solo contract?
No, his best friend back in those days was Lenny Waronker,
Loan
and
warranty,
and
yeah.
and Lenny had begun to work as a producer at Warner Brothers Records.
Oh, Warner Brothers,
So
yeah.
so he got a solo contract at Warner Brothers where he
Okay.
recorded quite a few albums,
Hmm.
including my personal favorite, Orange Crate Art.
Beautiful, yeah.
Uh, but what Van Dyke missed was the chance to be part of an album by America's most important music maker.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
Smile had come out, it would have elevated his position in the industry
Massively, yeah.
to a level that when he started making solo albums, they would have said, "Oh, let's check this guy out. We love what he did on Smile. Let's hear what he's got to say."
For sure. Hmm.
And so it was devastating for Van Dyke too.
Was he, just briefly, was he pressurized out by the fact that lyrics weren't liked, or was it other things came in, do you know?
Well, in the book, Van Dyke says some things that just are stunning about why he left.
Right.
He actually says he felt like he was in physical danger.
Hmm. Right. That's pretty
Uh,
worrying.
Yeah,
Goodness.
particularly for a guy his size.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Yeah,
so it was a devastating time for all of them.
for sure.
And so when Brian shelved Smile, when he sacrificed his greatest achievement to
Mm,
save the Beach Boys and to save himself,
yeah.
the question kind of became like Humpty Dumpty. How do we put pieces back together
Mm,
and satisfy the record company? And they never really did, with I think the exception of the album Sunflower. I think that was the Beach Boys' great achievement as an album.
great achievement. And I love the UK version, which had Cotton Fields as the first, as the opening track, the single. And so
I,
it blew
I,
my
I,
mind.
I don't like that being there at all.
You don't
But
know. I
no,
know. Well, being a young guy at the time, and a big hit in the UK, I grabbed it, you know. But I understand what you mean. I've got both versions, but yeah, incredible. And Surfs Up, and the early 70s were a good time for them in many ways, I think.
absolutely.
Lovely albums, great. I was privileged to see them in 75 in at Wembley with Elton John headlining and doing Captain Fantastic. I went, well, and that sort of links a little bit to, performing a new album. No one had heard it before, but with Smile, it's different, I suppose. But, this was a sort of premiere Captain Fantastic to silence. And the Beach Boys were, they'd blown everybody away with it surfs up songs and all sorts. It was magic. It was a great concert,
I was an enormous and still am an enormous fan of Elton John's. And in fact,
definitely.
the sequel to Captain Fantastic, Captain and the Kid, I
Yeah,
like even more than Captain Fantastic.
sure. Yeah.
It was very brave of him to do it that day.
Yeah,
Um,
I think so. Yeah.
perhaps ill-advised,
Hmm.
but but definitely he would have been better off going to a smaller venue.
Yeah.
Stadiums really are a difficult place to break in a new album, particularly in those days where there aren't all these big screens where you can see the artist up close and see
Absolutely.
graphics. It just wasn't the right day to do that.
No.
But but a terrific album statement by he and Bernie.
Sure.
As an autobiographical record, just kind of heartbreaking as well that Van
Mhm.
Dyke, that I'm sorry, that Elton John
Definitely.
almost lost it, but someone
Mm.
saved his life.
Yeah.
Meaning his old friend Long John Baldry said, "What are you doing getting married? What are you off your rocker?" Um,
Yeah.
but it's a great album. I played just enough bad piano to sit at the piano and play that
Well
record
done. Oh,
and sing
brilliant.
it and sing the songs and I just I love Elton.
Yeah.
And Elton, when it comes to Brian, Elton worships Brian above all.
I know. Amazing. Yeah. And of course, you were involved in the All Star tribute, weren't you? And Elton, didn't he said yes immediately, didn't you asked, and he said, yeah, I'm coming. I'll be there.
Well, what's I had worked previously on a number of tributes, and I had created the idea of this Brian Wilson tribute for years before we could finally find the right partners. And the
Okay.
late Chip Racklin and the late Phil Ramone and Radio City Music Hall Entertainment and TNT Network. It's so difficult to cobble together these things.
Sure, I bet.
And one of the things that everybody wants to know is who are the headliners.
Mm,
And so, who's going to be first to say yes? And Elton said, I don't care who else is going to be there. Count me in.
I love it. I love
And
it.
I remember talking with him at a Grammy event, not long before the tribute about what songs he was going to do. And he was thrilled to do a duet on "Wouldn't It Be Nice" with Brian, and then sing "God Only Knows." And Darian Sahanaja,
Yeah.
Brian's great musical leader
Oh, wow.
in his
Yeah,
band, and so important in the Smile story. He
for
tells a
sure.
great he tells a great story about rehearsals when Brian is watching Elton at rehearsal doing "God Only Knows," and Darian goes over to the piano and he's like, everything okay? And Elton's like, well, really, I mean, the master is over there watching me do his song.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Darian goes over to Brian and says, "Are you okay?" And he goes, "Well, I'm really nervous. There's Elton doing God only knows."
Wow.
So it's just
Fantastic.
wonderful moments like that.
Incredible. Yeah.
And you know, the tribute was a big step towards Smile happening.
Yeah.
We didn't know it at the time,
Mm.
but you know, as the creator and writer and producer of it, I insisted Smile music be part of it. And so our prayer opens the show.
Yeah.
And I remember in a meeting saying somebody has to perform Surf's Up. This song has
Mm.
to be part of the show.
Sure.
And the talent booker, talent producer, Ali Gifford, listened to the song and said, let me pray on that.
I love that. I
Let
love
me
that quality.
figure out who can sing that song.
Yeah.
And she came up with Vince Gill. And when Vince said yes, he had never heard the song before.
Oh, right. Never heard it. Okay.
He thought it was going to be like Surfing USA.
Okay.
And then when he heard it, was like, oh my God.
Yeah. Where do I? Yeah.
And then Phil Ramone had the genius of pairing him with David Crosby and
Oh, yeah.
Jimmy Webb on it. You can
Yeah.
go on the web and see it. It's
Yeah, for sure.
staggering.
I have. Yeah.
Um,
It's amazing.
the other thing that happened that night, which nobody expected, was that Brian performed Heroes and Villains.
Yeah.
And Brian, you could not talk to Brian about Smile music. I was one of the few people who could. I don't know if anybody else could, but it was in a conversation with him that I talked with him about putting Smile music on the Good Vibrations box set.
I was going to come
I
back to that, but yeah, but keep going, keep going.
um, I said to Brian, I said, you know, we ought to find an orchestra
Yeah.
and a choir to perform the Smile music. It's too beautiful not to be heard. And
Mm.
he said, "Good, I deserve that."
That's
You
fantastic.
know,
Love it.
that's a guy who knows what he's done.
Yeah,
Another
doesn't
time, Brian and I stood at the kitchen table of his home with a bunch of 3x5 index cards with all of the titles of Smile pieces on it and tried to sequence it in the mid 90s. We had no success. That's how difficult it was. Anyway, in December of 2000, just months before the tribute at Radio City, Scott Bennett and Brian's band had a Christmas party, and everybody who lived in LA and that was in the band came to the party, which meant Darian and Nick, may he rest in peace, and Probin, and of course Brian and Melinda were there, and my late wife Eva and Brian were sitting on a piano bench with their back to the piano bench, and Brian, knowing how much Eva loved Christmas, said, "So what do you want for Christmas?"
love it.
And she said, "For you to play Heroes and Villains." And he said, "Okay." And he turned around and played Heroes and Villains.
Wonderful. Yeah. Incredible.
And everybody, to use a term familiar to those in the former EU country called England, we were gobsmacked.
Yeah, absolutely.
And and when he finished, I said, "Brian, you should do that at the tribute." And he goes, "Okay."
Yeah. Wow.
And it's
How do,
unbelievable.
yeah. And I mean, sometime we've got a load of questions that people have sent in, actually. I don't know. Hopefully we'll have time for them. But so, that was another sort of domino in a way, or not a domino, but it
Absolutely.
changed from one extreme to the other. I said, like, yeah, okay, I can do that.
He was surrounded by, first of all, by having done the Pet Sounds tour.
Yeah,
He knew his band
yeah,
could do it, and
yeah,
he knew he was with people who, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, who not just loved him unconditionally
mm,
and had great musicianship, but
mm,
wanted to do the music with feeling exactly the way he had composed, arranged, and produced it.
yeah,
So he had no doubt that his band could do it.
yeah, absolutely. And weren't they fine, fine guys, fine girls, beautiful players, beautiful singers who loved him, and it came out in the atmosphere as well at the Pet Sounds shows as well, and at the Smile shows. It was just that spiritual atmosphere. that pervaded really. I mean, I felt it, and um, I jumping a little, but when I was fortunate enough to meet Brian after one of the shows, I think it was at Portsmouth. I got in backstage. I had an old Smile T-shirt on with the old album cover, you know, the original one, all faded, and I got through the guys. And I think I saw Jeff Foskett. I said, Jeff, I said, that music has healed me tonight. I was going through some stuff at the time. And I shook hands with Brian. I didn't know what to say. I'd got nothing for him to sign. I just thanked him. And he said, thank you, I think, or something like, just thank you. And I just felt healed. And yeah, a spiritual experience completely.